No, there is a very good peculiarity of the Russian nation. 1 hour ago in this hall, there was a discussion how to prevent the Cold War, and we had 5 times less people than now. And when we talk about economic theory, and this is just a very abstract thing, and we have so many people here attended, I can really go mad of this fact, because the Russians always wait for the end of this world, but never take it seriously. Today we are discussing probably quite an abstract topic. This is the economic philosophy, what is going to be our mainstream. But in reality, it is a very important story, because the politicians really do not like to accept the theories and concepts not really seriously, because they think that we people who do these theoretical jobs are smart guys and know something, but the life is different, and we as politicians know even better what to do. But in this context, I always remember what John Maynard Keynes said. That is actually the economist who has been quoted most of the time. He said, the politicians taking decisions and thinking they talked to the Lord when they were taking these decisions only repeat those things they were taught by a professor at the university they attended. And that is the real truth. Our politicians in Russia, and not only in Russia, they are not exceptions, especially in Russia, because it is quite typical for this country to have a very specific link between the theory and practice. In philosophy, we call it, in our own philosophical language, we call it ontologization of theoretical schemes. In the normal language, it means that we like scientific theories, especially from the West, and we really like to implement these theories no matter what it costs. And this is actually what is we let the people to be happy. It was in 1917, in 1991, when we were forced to live in a free market. And unfortunately, this forcement to be happy usually destinates at a very bad end. And what philosophy should underlie the economic policy is a very important practical issue. And today I don't really know what Vladimir Putin prefers in terms of ideology, because he is the guy of our times. I think he is probably quite close to the liberal tradition, or to the so-called liberal tradition. But our Russian liberals, they discredit this term of liberalism. I don't know how Mr. Glaziev or the Khodorkovsky may assess it, because they are really very serious theory guys in this context. But no matter which doctrine will be used, now we all wait who is going to be the Russian Prime Minister, who will be the Minister of Economic Development, what Mr. Putin will do, what Mr. Medvedev will be in charge for. And these 2 days showed that the main problem of our country is the absence of a targeted economic policy. So we do speak about it. We always want to everything to be better, but in reality, it doesn't exist, and they always make mistakes and tries. And our government is a kind of fire brigade. Sometimes pensioners or truck drivers may come out for to demonstrate their protest, and in this case, we need to settle down the fire. And today we got good panelists, very competent panelists. I don't know whether they will dispute and what they can dispute about. Each questions are simple on one hand. On the other hand, it was quite difficult to articulate them. And the most important is actually here, well, what ideas will prevail in the mainstream of economic thought in the foreseeable future. We know we we face the death. We faced the death of the directive plan, and a second death happened not so long ago. That's the death of the utopia of a free market. What is going to substitute these two things? Liberalism, what else? Okay, let's start with the one who can be considered as a patriarch of economic thought, Alexander Hudakormov. He knows how it was and how it can be in the future. He is the head of the World Economy Department, and he deals with different economic theories for a long time. You've got 7 minutes to talk, and then we will also have several more rounds. So I'm gonna start, and you can interrupt me when you get too bored of my presentation. I think that the current situation is characterized by the constant discussions between the market liberals and market fundamentalists and those who actually really like this state, who like this mobilization economy, like Mr. Glaziev. And I would like to put the question, which project is worse? Both projects are bad. As Stalin used to say the same, because I think that the current Russian elite is not really able to implement these fundamental or liberal programs, because the quality of our elite is very poor. When I'm talking about the large business and talk about the top officials, I can give you examples. Not so long ago, one of our Russian oligarchs wanted to buy a country house not so far from Nice. And then he actually changed his mind and paid a penalty of 39 million euros, a price of a new plan. One of our top governor members rented an apartment in London and paid a rent which is 112 times higher than his monthly salary, and he said that his wife gave this money to rent this apartment. And I remember this case, the previous Moscow mayor Lushkov, he also used to refer to his wife, who was a billionaire. We can also see the heads of our state corporations who earn 100 times more than the Russian president. Angus Deaton calculated, in order to be fully happy, a four-head family needs $75,000 a year. A higher income doesn't generate more happiness, and it also means that the salary of our top managers actually is not aimed actually to restore the labor power, but it serves something else. And Andrei Schleifer is one of the a well-known Western economist. He participated in our privatization process in Russia. Then the Russian government also found out that he also used to play in the stock exchange, having the inside information. So he was sued in the United States. His wife also was also sued, and Schleifer had to pay a fine of $2 million, and a University of Harvard, who sent this guy to Russia, paid a fine of $26 million. And the Russian officials who did this privatization even didn't even suffer. But our president said that Mr. Chubais was surrounded by two CIA agents. Our Russian elite is sick, is socially sick, is socially egoistic, and as long as this elite is sick, no program will be successful. We talked a lot about the modernization of our economy, about the digital economy, and this particular definition we have been discussing for the last 12 years, that the elite doesn't move because of its quality. I need 3 minutes more. You don't need to invent a bicycle. You need to learn from others, for example, from Singapore, because the Singapore leadership managed to change the situation in the country. But you may say that's Asia and we don't like Asia. Let's have a look at Europe. You can also learn how the post-war France changed the situation, where the elite was also very sick. The first sickness was the collaborationism, when France actually gave up in 5 days before Hitler. And another sickness was a colonialism, because France used to live based on the colonies, and after World War II it became impossible. So they decided to modernize or to die, and they adopted a new program which was called the dirigism. And dirigism, it is not a mobilization economy. In this case, France kept a very strong state-owned sector, not only in the industry but also in transportation and oil, gas, and energy sector. So the energy sector was kept by the government. Large banks were also controlled or owned by the government in order to have the cheap governmental money. So this France spent 20 years based on this dirigism model. France managed to join the club of the developed countries, and France enjoyed a fantastic growth rate. And France was also ahead of Germany in terms of growth rate in 1960. And I think France also chose the neoliberal model in 1980s, privatization, market economy, and the refusal of indicative planning. But there is another way from this divergence. That's the way to the democratic socialism. Initially, this way was chosen by Mitterrand and his government, but then France saw the outflow of capital. So France was surrounded by other countries, and the capital decided to leave France. That's why France decided to get rid of this democratic socialism. So this way for the democratic socialism is possible also for Russia through this dirigism, and I think it's very visible, because we as a country is actually a more self-sustainable country than France. In our country really needs, and I will keep repeating it, because our country needs a very strong social democratic party, and we still don't have this kind of party, so we don't have any strong core of opposition. And as for the dirigism program, so in this case, the indicative planning is a very good tool, which already proved very good in other countries, taking these countries out of the technological lagging behind. Thank you very much. It was a very clear presentation and speech, and I would like to agree with Alexander Udokormov. in terms in terms of his social democratic or socialistic orientation. Usually, the intellectual people criticize the people that they don't think right, but we all think right. I looked at the poll made by the Levada Center, and it seemed to be quite important for me. And the question in the poll was as follows: we asked the Russian people which ideology was more preferable by the for the people, and you could also choose 5 or 6 options like Stalin and a strong hand. And it was 27% of people who voted for it, for this very strong hand, not like Stalin, then more liberal 6%, to communism also around 7%, and social democracy in socialist idea is 29%. That's what surprised me. And this particular attitude in the population showed me that the people didn't want to dream of this return of communism, this directive planning. So the people are quite smart and they still want to be sure of tomorrow, but the people don't want to lose the market and the business. So we need to discuss it. In our political environment, there is no real party, social democratic party, only the party with equal justice. Russia is a kind of systematic party and gets 5% during the elections, and it is not doesn't play the role of social democratic party. And I would like to ask Sergei Glaziev, because he really fills the material ground for new doctrines. And today, I think it's a big story, because now we are currently may enter something new, something more interesting, because the economies are changing, and our disputes on dirigism, on liberalism, are outdated. Maybe there is another doctrine which will be a mainstream. Sergey, please try. What do you think about it? Ruslan, thank you very much. I also agree almost with everything what was said by Alexander. There are only 2 issues unresolved. What is the Social Democratic Party of a European type today in Russia? Because I will visit this social internationalism meetings. I don't want to attend it on because there were issues I wanted to discuss there, like how to react collectively on catastrophe. It was not really interesting for them. They were discussing about the legals of sexual minorities, about legalizing one gender marriages. So Europe probably went to another direction. I sometimes don't really understand why you say that I actually in for the mobilization economy. Probably we meet to too seldom, because I don't really appeal to this mobilization economy. I don't really understand what it is in the current conditions and circumstances, because the elite is actually so irresponsible. It is actually quite dangerous to hand over additional managing tools to these guys. I would like to tell more from the fundamental and scientific positions, because the mainstream ignores the issues of economic development. And we talk about our future, I think we need to go away from this mainstream paradigm. Not the liberal, I'm talking about the libertarian paradigm. We need to go away from this Marxism paradigm, because any mainstream paradigm was caring about how the public product is distributed, why these people are rich, the others are poor. And the Marxism said that actually the source of every rich rich people is actually the distribution of labor, and the social inequality was a normal situation for the market competition, but we haven't had this market competition as the libertarians thought. So we need to develop a new scientific paradigm, and the grounds for this paradigm are clear. And the main issue is actually to think about the development, how the economy is developing, and what we need to do in order to increase the welfare, the quality of life, to harmonize the relationships in the society. We faced this kind of governmental development in our country. Sometimes this development was a mobilizing one, and it used to be also a liberal one. When we talk about the forcing and the freedom, so we need to create such an economic governing system which can generate the maximum growth rates in order to improve and increase the quality of life for the people in the country. And this philosophy is used by those countries who are now succeeding. I was writing a lot about the technological cycles, but the same cycling system we can also see in our uh, system of production relations, because the Marx used to say that actually that the production capacities can contradict with the production forces, because now we also may see a new economic world order, for example, which is based on the Japanese or European experience. It is now implemented in different ways, despite the liberalization, which is try to liquidate the state at a barrier and to make all the people equal. It used and wanted to set a barrier for the American cyclic capital movement flow. Here, in this case, we're not talking about the dirigism or the liberalism in the economy, because the government should harmonize the interest in the society and should set the rules of game. For example, in China, there is also an ideology and a support for the private business, where the government keeps the heads in the financial sector, but also allows the large private corporations to exist in the forestry, for example. And we also can see now fantastic growth rates now in China, and these growth rates are enjoyable for those economies who really choose this new way of a new economic world order, because some in this case the government integrates this society and cuts off those businesses which are against the public welfare, and supports those businesses which can only contribute positively to this public welfare development. In India, we have the biggest democracy, and the European social democracy was actually the ground for the current economic world order, because the target of the economy is not to provide a maximum profit, not to show the highest performance indicators, but the target is actually to improve, to increase the real public welfare, which can also accommodate the private business, the governmental control, where the government can create PVPs with the business, probably at a kind of mobilization or mobilizing economy. When the Shanghai Stock Exchange had a blow, financial blow explosion, actually the people were prosecuted there in comparison to what happened in the Moscow Stock Exchange. I give applause to Sergey for his brilliant speech. What Sergey, what you said is touched me really very deeply, especially what he said about the European social democracy, that it goes the wrong direction. Because if you talk about about the healthiest countries in Europe, that the combination of link liberal and right liberal parties can guarantee the healthiest development, and a big coalition in Germany can demonstrate it very clear. On the other hand, the social democracy is losing its position among the voters. And the ground reason is that we don't have now the big plants with a big amount of employees, where the trade unions could really have a significant impact on the people working in these plants. Now the economy is changing and is becoming small but beautiful. Because in this case, you're not having an absolutely different economy based on the technological revolution, and it's quite difficult to fight against it. So the social democracy is losing this situation now. I would like to make a small remark to what you said. At the moment, we do see an expanding bureaucratic empire in the European Union, where the social democratic influence is significantly less than the influence of the national parliaments. Maybe, Sergey, we can certainly keep discussing this topic. And I think certainly the bureaucracy is privatizing some of the functions. Of Karl Marx used to say that any bureaucracy was privatizing the state. But if you actually look at this balanced situation in Europe, you can see that the power of bureaucracy is limited. And I would like to give the floor to our new panelist, where I would like to find the information. Mr. Didenko. He is the member of International Union of Economists, and he is working at the Argumentini daily newspaper. Am I right? As a member of the International Union of Economists, you have to speak about the economic theory. We need to know what handbooks are going to be important in the 15th, because the current mainstream, which is being taught from China to America, is outdated, but we have no other economic stuff to teach. And there's a gap between the reality and what we get at university is getting bigger, and unfortunately we don't get any real substitution. We get this substitution only in our words and our discussions. Even in Germany or in the West, everybody say that it is wrong, but what is right? Because many people fight with the GDP. People like GDP when the salary goes up, but when the GDP went up by 20% and your own income only by 1%, why are you happy about this GDP? It doesn't matter. So you're welcome. Thank you, Ruslan, for giving me the floor and opportunity to take part in this discussion. Yesterday, Ruslan recommended me to speak more about the future and the digital economy, because the discussion about how the economy can develop, how the society can develop, because the society and human beings are evaluating up on a constant evolution. And as it was said many times today, now we have the time when we see the breakdown of conventional economic models, and when Mr. Mao said correctly, we don't now can say what is happening with the economy.
The measurable values, such as the gross domestic product, is something that may be measured improperly, because it stopped reflecting the dynamics of welfare. Because if you, let's say, buy an e-book, you're not influencing the growth of GDP, but rather the decline of it, because when you bought it, you are depriving of income the printers, the producers of papers, and a lot of other adjacent industries. You are buying copyright. That is certainly a big problem, not just for the publishing houses, but also for the economy in general. Speaking about the world economy, I'd like to say that this is something that has already been addressed. Just recently, the American scientists conducted a study and made a very unusual conclusion. In the nearest future, 47% of jobs in the United States are going to be impacted by the artificial intelligence, AI. So it looks like that almost half of all jobs in the United States are going to be lost. And they're going to be replaced with algorithms, robots, and programs that can do their work much more efficiently than people. We all know that algorithms never get old. They don't require a salary. Their effectiveness is high. They don't need to sleep. They don't have any conflicts of interest. They're not corrupt. They never make mistakes, and so on. In future, this algorithm would be self-teaching and self-learning. The AlphaZero algorithm by DeepMind, which is owned by Google, learned to play chess by playing chess with itself in only 4 hours, and it became the strongest chess player in the world, both again amongst people and against machine. And Magnus Carlsen, it has taken him 20 years to get there, and tens of millions of euros were invested in his progress. A lot of professions and jobs are now in the risk zone, and in addition to the standard professions such as journalists, lawyers, accountants, and cab drivers, there are others that could be added to this list, such as artists, painters, translators. All of these things are becoming to be replaced by the machines, which is a huge risk for the economy. And maybe this will result in a subsequent boost, but we don't know whether this is going to be a good thing for us or a bad thing for us. Because if we are to remember the formula of Karl Marx, work plus capital equals cost, we deal with the situation where the value of labor is going down and the cost is going up. So very soon capital will be playing the most significant role, because capital is growing up to nearly 100%. As has been said by many economists at the Gaidar Forum, there are programs that can very precisely assess risks of default by debtors, by those that take loans. And therefore, the algorithm can allow the bank to decide what is the probability of default by borrowers. And this is just a midterm forecast, but there are also long-term forecasts. They're talking about blockchain and new technologies, but nobody is predicting so far how these technologies, new technologies, are going to impact our labor markets. To conclude, I don't want to alarm you very much because there's a lot of stats on this subject. I'd like to say simply that one of the most common ways that the economists see are the introduction of the unconditional basic income, which would mean that every citizen would get certain funds, certain amounts of money, for the simple fact that they are the citizens of that country, they pay their taxes, and so on and so forth. But that is the path forward for developed nations. It's not so promising for Russia because people would be treating this as, social dependency. And speaking about the future, we need to analyze this even deeper and understand the cons that outweigh the pros of these new technologies, such as social risks and growing unemployment. We need to be cognizant of that and take this into account as we discuss the economy that we would like to have. Thank you very much. And the very last speaker for today, during the first round, will be Dmitry Mityaev, the director of the Center for System Forecasting. Thank you. I would like to say that he really likes well-founded statements, and I like that, and I would like to give him the floor with great pleasure. He likes to justify his opinions by empirical data and calculations. You don't have to agree with him, but you have to recognize that he's been quite successful. Ruslan, since these are debates, I would like to maybe make this discussion a little bit more acute. Nothing has died. No utopias have died. Neither the directive planning system has died, nor has the free market died. Speaking about the directive or planned economy or the mobilization type of economy, there are a lot of other tags and labels people use. That's the structure that allows all contemporary multinational corporations and large banks, China, to prosper and keep everyone under a lead. Historically speaking, the most effective economy in history was the Soviet economy during the World War II era, and it was an objective fact for many reasons: effectiveness, material intensiveness, and it was more efficient than the economy of Europe that was against us, and that's why we won the war. And following the war, the rebuilding of the Russian economy was also quite successful. We were able to repeal rationing before even the UK. So the same goes for the free market is still alive. And speaking about the shock doctrine, I'd like to say that this is the capitalism of catastrophe, according to Naomi Klein, who studied this really in depth. And now, going back to our situation, I'd like to say that for a quarter century, we have been part of the Washington Consensus. This is the doctrine of the seemingly of the ultra free market, but this is a very tough and rigid directed plan for the third world, the peripheries and colonies, something that has been given to us, something that one has to follow without any exceptions. And we don't seem to see the practical implications of that. We do things that we are told to do, we target inflation, and then we see the results that we get. And if we leave this quasi-free market system in place, although it is a very rigid directive planning system and economy policy, we sort of contribute to the external shocks by doing that. And if we look at what's going on in the world, we may see the collapse of the entire economic system. The trade wars are about to erupt. And this interface module that we're looking at, and if you look back at 2008, this module is stronger than what happened in 2008 when we fell by 8%, and we can see even more serious repercussions. What's coming to replace these systems? In reality, the mainstream system cannot be reformed. It's something that paves essentially this dale in the forest, and it can only get away if the system gets destroyed. The second point is that somehow connected to the digital economy, I think we have to, think outside this box of the digital economy. We have alpha and omega, we have micro and macro, we have nano economy. Everything is happening inside people's head, and our conscience is being reshaped. We need to study this further. Mr. Mao was mentioned here. Vladimir Mao was mentioned here, and what the liberals are saying in the economic policy, they are trying to moderate the system. I was part of the working group that Mao headed to start the planning system under Law 172. He said that you need to enact this law on beekeeping, he called it, because it's harmless. But once it was enacted and the grants to develop the implementation of this law was given to the HSE and the Russian Academy for Economic Planning. Unfortunately, we don't have an historic opinion on this subject matter. Thank you very much for your statement. Dear friends, I'd like to introduce to you the very unknown person. His last name is Kazbulatov. And why do you not applaud? And he's got a very nice sounding name. His name is Ruslan. So you all have a chance to have selfies with him, and you'll be happy. And at this point in time, I'd like to give him the microphone, and I would ask him very simply. Mr. Mityayev just said that mainstream cannot be reformed. It's unreformable. I do not quite agree with that statement, because we don't know what will come to replace it. We know that we've had in the past the directive markets or planning markets, and then the free market came to replace it. Then now we're talking about the mixture of the two, or what should be the proportion. But the devil is in the detail. But Ruslan will have to essentially be held responsible for everything that has been happening in this country. And now, but let's talk about mainstream. Thank you, Ruslan, dear moderators, speakers, colleagues, and members of the audience. I would like to try to address all of these issues. Of course, all of these social systems are absolutely changeable. They can undergo any changes. Of course, this is a law, and the mathematicians have been, lashing out at our academicians. Balkin was no exception. They were saying, we've been sending spaceships into orbit and did a lot of other things, and you cannot come to an agreement on the matters of economics. Why can't you figure this out? Well, that's because for billions of years, the mathematical pathways had been in existence, and they were really verifiable. What is happening in the economy? We don't know. In what mood the president wakes up? What are the troops that he's going to send to the Gulf of Persia or somewhere else? What will the president say about the next set of arms that our great experts are going to design, and what impact that will have? We don't know this, and we cannot know this, and that is why all of those conclusions and presumptions we make and the models we build are so presumptive and assumptive. The scientists for many years before us, 300 years ago, they predicted cycles, economic cycles, trade cycles, financial cycles, and we more or less imagine the cycle of crises. But going back to the idea that the social systems and social phenomena are unchangeable, I would like to say they always undergo changes, and we cannot say that the social system cannot be reformed. That means that you don't know the foundations of society or societal sciences. And so when people would say that socialism cannot be reformed progressively, I think that means that was said by those who are not educated well enough. Of course, this is something that can undergo change, and they need to be changed. It's just a matter of what kind of changes we need to see, what elements need to be preserved. We shouldn't throw away everything. I've been studying the Wagner law. It's not really a well-known economist. He was in Germany after Marx, a little bit later, and there is a theorem or formula of Wagner. He said that as scientific progress accelerates, the role of the state in the economy should be increased, and that's maybe the reason why he is being muted. He's not being touted. I started studying this, and I came to the following conclusion. The various forms of ownership are neutral. They shouldn't have any ideological coloring. They are related to the level of development of the productive factors, the maturity of production from the technological standpoint. And the higher is the development of those factors, the less is the presence of the state, because there's no need to regulate them. But in weak states, where the economy is not really well developed, and some industries may be developed unevenly, and there is a lot of space, not populated densely. Of course, here we would have the elements of the state. And I came up with the formula of optimality for various forms of ownership, depending on the levels of technological maturity of the various production factors. It seems to me that it is something that merits attention. It was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. I wrote an article about this, and in my books this is also quite well described. But maybe there are not a lot of people that want to support these ideas and develop, because everything is really under the hill of ideology. Because ideology is the lowest level of politicization. And that's when people see you as a friend, if what you are confessing, as an ideologist is against their views. I think that is what the crux of the matter is. And as for how certain ideas can serve the society, I think it all depends on the rationality of what we're discussing. I wrote the book called The Decline of the Market Fundamentalist, and this is something that has been going on since ancient time. Keynesian thought has been destroyed for two reasons. First of all, a monetarist keeps certain ideas that are very primitive, accounting-based ideas, as it were. In accounting, everything is straightforward. You use the formula. You go back and forth. If you use a Rogov formula, then you would discover that there was a mistake there, and a third-year student was noticed in the Rogov's formula. And so these formulas are quite mistaken. But at the same time, when you have the over-amassment of the riches in the hands of the state, this results in a collapse. But on the other hand, the bureaucracy is interested in shedding responsibility. They would say, this is market, and that means that I'm not responsible for anything. The ministers are not responsible for their industries, for the regions. And because there is no such thing as the responsibility, there is nothing directive here. Directive could apply to things where we're talking about the government sector, and indicative where it applies to mixed non-governmental forms of ownership, but this is where you need to have very smart people around. And in conclusion of my statement, I would like to say this. Science always have a tangential influence on the politics, and never direct one. Of course, Plato wanted to have it otherwise, but in our conditions, when our scientists get to the power, they become even greater bureaucrats than the classical ones. And do you say this for yourself as well? I'm an exception to this rule, of course. Just remember that statement. And now, in conclusion, I would like to say, it is great that we gather like this from time to time and spill our guts and say what's on our minds. And I've been to different audiences elsewhere, and I see that our economics thought is not worse than the best economic thought bearers elsewhere. But I would like to say that our greatest idea, no matter how great they are useless if or unless we don't change the personnel selection policy. If the president doesn't change it, if the same selection policy is continued, the same people would still be there. Nothing he is talking about, those breakthrough ideas and high growth rates that would outstrip the world's rates, they are not going to be accessible. And that's what the president needs to understand. And those of his true followers, and I'm not sure that there are that many of them, but if they don't understand this, and they fail to understand this, and if they don't notice the great numbers of mid-level and low-level management personnel, things are not going to change for the better. They are going to change for the worse in all respects, especially considering the geopolitical background. Thank you very much, Ruslan Imranovich. Please stay with us. We would have 35 more minutes for this discussion to continue. Let me focus your attention on the fact that the productive forces, well, we've agreed that the market and the planned economy should be somehow mixed. And that was Lisichkin's brochure on the subject in the 60s. And then the same thing happened in the Czech Republic. And there would be cases where there would be more market and less state, and there would be other cases where there's more state and less of the market. I think we should stop using those terms, socialism and capitalism. I think there has to be some fundamental correlation between the sociality and the effectiveness in the economies. And unfortunately, these are very opposite things. So freedom is effectiveness, and sociality is fairness. And this is where they may be juxtaposed, they may be antagonistic to each other. If you're able to find this combination, that means that you can have a healthy economy. But nobody's talking about the productive forces. People are talking about the fact that the post-Western world is about to begin, that it is looming. And Ruslan Khasbulatov said that because of the scientific progress, according to the Wagner's law, the state's participation should increase. He didn't elaborate why this is happening, but I'm thinking that today, when the anthropological involvement in the nature is actually putting the man's life on Earth on its brink, I think that's when cooperation between the states should be taking place. People should be working towards a common goal, not necessarily in the private sector, but on the government-to-government level. No matter how we treat the state, there is nothing we can replace the state. Libertarians have this theory that there are, market mistakes or market errors, and if we do not regulate the market, those mistakes and errors can become fatal. That's where you have monopolies, information asymmetry, and you need to fix those mistakes of the market. Who will be fixing them? It's the state's responsibility to do that. But one thing is not better than the other. You can fix it in such a way that things will turn even for worse. But as soon as the state interferes deeper than just fixing the mistakes, the state, if it is in control, it can do whatever it wants, and it can wreak havoc. This is the reality that we see today. But are there any trends that tell us that when you see the share of the market lowering and going down, is there something that's what's required by the new economy? Maybe it's requiring a new sort of quality in an individual. So let's say egotism should go away and collectivism should prevail. And that's what many people in the West are saying, especially given the economic disparity that we've been seeing over the last 30 years. So maybe we should make sure that everyone can have access to welfare, and not just the select few. Sergei, anything you would like to say? Your economical mode, will they change anything in the theory? They can and they are changing things in the theory. But going back to the ideas, what are going to be the ideas that will be prevailing in the mainstream, which somebody said cannot be changed? But Ruslan Khasbulatov said everything is changing. The politics are changing. It's becoming more complex. And if you look at the management theory, you would see that if we want to have effectiveness, the selective capability of this system should be correspondent to the diversity of the object of management. And the same applies to ownership. Those relations are becoming more and more complex, and you would have to give way to people representing the labor force amongst the directors of the facility, and the engineers should be involved, and the local authorities should also, because they represent the people. Plus, there is now a fight for making sure that competition is really destructive. Here in Russia, we are suffering because everything is monopolized. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that when competition is really fatal, that's something. Plus, if you want to implement large-scale projects impacting a lot of people, you have to come to an agreement with the state, reach such a state where you can have PPP arrangements, private-public partnerships. But the economic thought is about ideology. It's the ideology that can say that mainstream always stands behind the interest of the elite. Vladimir Mao was mentioned here. He is the representative of that mainstream, a very bright one, and he is trying to select the simplest phrases. They used to say, the less state there is, the better, because that's what the Washington consensus believes. Then they said they forgot that that's what Washington consensus says. Okay, you're right, they would say, talking to people that say that there should be government regulation, but everything will be stolen. That's the second threat. Then the third simple thought, they've already agreed that if we use today's technologies and digital money, we can create such a system of management that it would be impossible to steal things. Things are going to be transparent. And then they are saying things could have been worse. Don't touch it. Sergey, thank you very much. We've already overcome this market fundamentalism. We've won. This is more like a lecture about the harm of religion, talking to the atheistic crowd, preaching to the choir. But what are the new elements of theory should emerge because the material life of the society is changing? So, Ruslan, what would you say? Regarding competition, I would like to say that following many years of my research, I came to the conclusion that in the case of transnational, multinational corporations, they do not see any competition at all, anything that comes up against them. And there's a term that has been introduced. They are too big to fail, that's the common phrase. The government is focused on protecting these largest banks and multinationals. And whenever they get bankrupt, it's not because of their parameters or values or difficulties, but rather because they have taken too risky and opportunistic transactions or outright stealing. But since these multinationals amount to about 25% of the global, actually of GDP, and over 50% comes to the normal sector, the competition is supported by the medium and small businesses. And if we look at this situation, this is confirmed by the reality we see. They say 10 to 25% is the value of the small business, which means we don't have the small business. And the large multinationals are essentially outside of any competition, which means that our system cannot use the levers of competition, and that's what causes these factors and causes us lagging behind economically. I beg to differ with my namesake. Speaking about SMEs, this is only 1/5 of our GDP, indeed. And people say that we need to somehow expand and increase its share. But I'm saying, and I always say that, it's not something that can happen by itself. It cannot expand by itself. The size of the small business in the large countries is driven by the fact that they have the large businesses, diversified businesses. And the SMEs are fighting to become cogs and wheels in that large mechanism. And in our country, the large business is concentrated in two fields, fuel and raw materials, plus finances, banks. And these are the parasites on the human body, on the body of the mankind. And during stagnation, they get super profits, and then they report to the president. And the income is generated by taking fees from moving the money from one account to another in their own bank, and it can be up to 10%.
So I think that this story with the medium and small-sized businesses, like the tax decrease and so on, is very simple. For example, a small-sized business manufactures chairs, and these chairs are demanded by people. So these entrepreneur doesn't really care about the taxes, and he can agree with everyone, with even the fire safety commission. But if you have the landscape that everything is occupied by the imported goods, no matter how you decrease the taxes, the result will be bad. And you know it because you had to fight against Yeltsin in this issue, that the country was the victim of fashion, of natural competitive advantage. How used our Western friends to say it? We don't repeat our mistakes. We were living in a good world of perestroika with a bubble gum. We were good at manufacturing oil, gas, timber, and the rest would be imported because we didn't have these consumer products in the Soviet Union. We were happy to have them, and that is something what we got. And the academician Ivanov is an interesting guy. He used to say it's an bad danger for me that the Cold War can be over and we have to leave the sanctions. If we lift the sanction, we will have the lot of imported goods again, and we won't have do anything. We will have nothing to do because we have to thank the West because the West is an enemy now, and that's why we can do good things here in Russia. Let's go back to this chair production, as you mentioned. My answer is actually we talk about we won't find an answer in this scheme of planned economy and market economy. Because Egalité, Fraternité und Liberté, that says one thing. When we talk about the market, that's actually the will money gear. But what is the plan? That's an actually usually fear, and we need a third element, a kind of spirit, which should also insert a goal here. If we take everything what is happening in the West and in the East, they have these certain goals or targets, and the share of the state in the GDP in the Western countries is 40-50%, and our goal is 30%. Why 30%? In our ministry, if because we are actually even more pauper than the Pope. Because if we look at this scheme of planned economy, market economy, we need to go away from it and find something what can be third here. Now, Comrade Khodakормov, you have the floor. I want you to focus on an old formula that the human being is the main producing power. It is something what is accepted by the Western economic philosophy, and in the mainstream we have also the behavior economy, the experimental economy, so the economy which usually deals with human being. So the Western thought goes away from the people who are egoistic or irrational. So in this case, I think the Western economic thought becomes more realistic. And Sergey, you understand on the mainstream monetarism, supply side economics, but this kind of things we used to have during the Reagan or Thatcher, but the Western mainstream is much richer. It also includes the Keynes theory or Stiglitz, Schiller, Akerlof. I'm just tell you the Nobel Prize winners, and they have a different attitude to the capitalism. They also offer a different ways to treat the capitalism and the economy. Also in Russia, Ruslan, we also have changes in our economic thought. As soon as the Western countries discovered the human genome, we started developing the psychogenomics. So we had also scientists dealing with the nature of human beings, and the conclusions were very social democratic, but not in terms of for fighting for sexual freedom, but in terms of increase of remuneration, salaries, and incomes for working people, because he was a very social democratic guy. The sexual freedom shouldn't be banned. It should be. On one hand, there is a mainstream which is developing in the theory, and on the other hand, we have a mainstream in the economic policy, and in this case, we have a kind of vulgar interpretation which is made by International Monetary Fund. Let's read the memorandum of IMF aimed for our monetary authorities. That is something what we can really laugh at. That's true, and I think I said in the very beginning that we really like it. We really like accept doctrines without any prejudice, and it is our problem that we have ev actually everything in one bottle, because, and this is very sad, because we are currently uh, enemies for the West, and we, on the other hand, we accept everything what the West says and not what the West does. And when I ask the Western guys, why do you teach us this or that, and you do other things, for example, the subsidizing the aircraft manufacturing, for example, the United States manufacture Boeing aircraft, and they said, well, this is the aircraft you can use to fly, you don't need to pay for it. As soon as you have money, you will give them back. What it is, that is a real social governmental support. The Export Import Bank provides money for it, and we need to make the full repayment. And why? And it's something what we copied from the West, and it was the mistake, and they recognize it. And why do you also teach us actually to give these agricultural subsidies? You have to ban these agricultural subsidies in your countries first. Why your farmers only 3% of your population? Oh, 3%, and they will come by their tractors and will actually protest, and your farmers actually keep silent. So you need to do the real market economy. That's a wonder story, wonderful story. And now we always talk about the current situation. We need to think what is going to be in the future. We have 15 minutes left. Do we have any volunteers from the audience? No, I would like to give 19 seconds to every single panelist. That's actually the managing director, the CEO of a furniture plant. I will give you floor. I would like to say a couple of words. We still have a hope. During the Yeltsin's time, we had a very comprehensive libertarian concept. In the foreign affairs, we went away from them. Mr. Kozlov is no more here. Then we had also a guy with a furniture background who used to manage the army. He used these libertarian basics in the army. Now he is not there, so we still have a hope that our leaders will decide, will understand that with the current situation we are not able to achieve the high growth rates. So we have only one leader. We don't have leaders, we have only one leader, and he has to be responsible for everything. This is our country. Everything, a lot depends on the first person. Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, almost everything depends on the first person. We used to have the political bureau of the Communist Party, and they discussed these things, and now we have only one person responsible for everything. I can agree with the other speakers in many things, except for one moment. The role of a human being in the economy won't go up, will go down, because we will have a higher participation of AI in the economy. And also would like to clarify that the economies will be more planned because it is easier and more efficient in terms of AI to plan everything in advance. And as for the non-positive perspectives, this trend for the growing inequality will be here. So inequality will go up if we don't invent something disruptive, because the monopolization goes up in the world, because Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple, they are the five large companies, and we all pay to them, and we also really contribute to this growing inequality in the world, and we need to accept it as it is, and we need to think what is going to be in the future. Glaziev, Metyukov, and Hasbulat, we have 1 minute to speak. And I would like to go back to the economic science. And if we actually analyze all this process in the economy, we also have a background for the fundament for the new economic paradigm, which can allow us to forecast what is going to be in the future. And this paradigm is based on a non-linear process change, where we have the technological and institutional revolutions, where we have also the uprises and downfalls. So now the economy comes out from a crisis, and we do see the new core of the global economy in the Southeast Asia, and we can also join this core if we actually can build this outstripping economy movement, or we can also stay in the American-centric economy, or we cannot join the new Chinese economic one. And I think the gap in these two centers can be fatal. So our economic theory can really forecast very exactly what is going to be with our economy, because what we need to do in order to join the new economic core, or to stay within the old center, what is actually not really promising. This neoliberalism, which is still quite popular here, because it can be go to the transhumanism with this revolution of machines. We have Herman Graf, the head of Sberbank. He said once that we didn't need to give any knowledge to the people, because they would ask, and they also said that the virtual persons were more important than the real people. In order to avoid this situation, we need to understand that the new humanism is possible, and the role of human being is going up and not down. What does the algorithm are supposed to do in the future? That's their problems. The new humanism. What do we need to do with the old one? Hasbulatov. Dear colleagues, you also paid attention during the last years, especially after the end of this global crisis of 2009, 2010, the international organizations started paying attention to what is happening. Now we see the big amount of welfare controlled by a small number of population. We have the growing number of poor people on the other hand. We also have a very reputed Western economist, and they say that the class fight is back, that the Karl Marx was right, and the dominating economic theories, which are usually the main methods for the economic policies, they do not work right now, and there is a search for strategic ideas which particular economic theory or which mixture of economic theories should be chosen. And it is absolutely clear it is in our country, also among our politicians and economists, but at the moment we don't really have these kind of things. But we also need to be more consecutive in using this or that economic theories. We use the Keynes theory. We created the social state, the society welfare, and then we started using the new neoliberalism in the economics. And the main mistake of the governing class and of scientists was that we got rid of this Keynes theory, who create this actual social state and a certain equality of different classes, because now we have also the situation where we actually and now we actually are not able to come out of it, because if we actually can search for new ideas, we need to think also how we can neutralize this particular risks. And now I would like to come back to my thought, because I have been cooperating with the power for a long time, and I decided that we need actually to carry out a very serious HR reform. We need also HR revolution, because we can we won't be able to achieve most of the right targets, but we won't have enough manpower, good manpower, to do it. I think it's quite sad, because we started here somebody with the statement of one of you that no matter how good the theory is, the Russian elite is so bad that there is no sense to do anything. And Professor Hasbulatov says the same. Why did we spend this 1.5 hours here? Now we have the Q&A session. Just a brief question. I represent the Russian-Chinese Friendship Society. I will ask you about our relations with China. The, because I would like to ask Mr. Hasbulatov, because he represents a very old Russian University of Economics, and he is also an Oriental man, and he also may care about his relations with China. At the military and political level, we are developing the relations with China, but we're in a very good way. But as for the private business, here we have quite a negative effect. So the commercial courts have a lot of claims, and there are also blacklists from both parties. So, Ruslan, I would like to ask you, as a representative of this oldest commercial university in Russia, why our relations are developing in this way with China. First of all, I want to give a floor to a Western guy. Is anyone who would like to make a clarity to our mess? Have been watching you for the second time. You're actual liberals, but not the social democrats. You're really nice liberals. You're looking like social democrats. And your applause for you, and I can finish my speech. I can explain what I mean. Sergei and his neighbor were discussing about the size of the government. You shouldn't look at the market as at a god. You should look at the government as a machine, because every single man should be able to manage a machine, to govern a machine, because the modern science developed and technology to analyze the statistic from every single region in order to optimize the optimal size of the government is the share of the budget in the gross regional product. When the physics go inside into the economics, it's good. And I think I was having actually a C in physics. Your time is out. I apologize for interrupting you. Does anyone else would like to ask a question? You were the first one to ask a question. Please tell us something good. But physics. My question is complicated. As for the physics, so we have the theory of particles and the waves, and when the physicians they usually use either this or that theory. And Friedrich von Hayek, Keynes, and so state economy or the market economy. What is your question? I agree with all of you. That's all. When there are some fragments. Because the general system is not really clear, and as the Ruslan said, that the transnational corporations who were behaving themselves as countries, and they captured not territories but areas in the economy. In my questions, we were talking about the theory, not about the life. What can you tell us about the theory? One scientist described the reality as it is. He found a method. And Yuri Krupnov knew this particular scientist. And the one who can describe the theory of flight in language terms will get a Nobel Prize. If we, the economists, got involved into physics, what is going to happen? How can you describe the reality, and when, who and when will create the theory of future economy? When is the question? I think it is actually not our question. Yeah, we'll give the floor for the answer to Ruslan Huspalatov, and we will finish today. As for China, here we have lots of reasons. Not only with China, we don't have anything to sell because we have a very small list of products available to sell. I have been dealing with the global economics and economy since 1984. When we compare the list of our products exported, this list is actually even shorter than bullets of lighting. As for China, you know that is actually a kind of new economic model, and this model is a convergent model. In Vladimir Lenin was actually the real convergent economist, because he actually implemented the capitalistic system during this new economic model in 1922, and China is very talented in developing these things. And also see here this Chinese scientist like Maslow and the others, they don't talk about it. The China has a very strict pricing policy. China never buys expensive resources. And we in Russia don't really understand why China is willing to get the low prices, and it is important for China to keep the low prices. And that's why they have this kind of profitable budget, and we are not able to supply to them at the price that China would like to buy. not because China is really willing to put a pressure on us, because they have their own settings. They would like to have their internal price at a certain level. That's why I don't want to buy at high prices. So we took a false theory and we got a very primitive structure. Okay, dear friends, it was very interesting for me, and I really hope you also enjoyed this session. We're only in the beginning of this way you can build a new economic model. We don't really know how the digital economy can also influence the production powers. Probably there will be no place for the market at all, but we should think about it. And I would like to thank you all for your tolerance and attention. I wish you all the best. Thank you.